Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Cherian Koshy to talk about the neuroscience of charitable giving. Cherian, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
So, as we begin, I was hoping you could start us off with your superhero origin story.
I don't know that it's a superhero origin story, but as most people did, I fell backwards into fundraising. It was actually my first job was in a nonprofit 30 some years ago now. And I fell into the deep end of fundraising and tried to, I think as most people did when they got started, just had to figure it out as they went along. And that was me as well. And so I got really lucky. I got connected to some people who are really, really good in the profession, people who wrote the book, if you will, in the profession, and they helped mentor me along. And that was super helpful. And then I, got into AFP and NHCGP and all these other associations that got me into professional development. And that was really helpful. But for me in particular, as I got through different roles and different positions and started figuring things out, one of the things that I really never truly figured out was, why do donors do the things that they do? And so I would see donors maybe not react to appeals that we thought were great, or they would react in ways that were not necessarily how we anticipated they would react. And so that really got sort of under my skin, and it really started to pique my interest around behavioral science and neuroscience and what was really driving behavior beyond just good copywriting or good website design or something like that, and really starting to understand what was behind the deeper decision making that people were processing. And so that led me to some more sort of outside of the fundraising philanthropic landscape study, and getting some professional certifications and just reading in those spaces, and it really kind of piqued my interest even more. And that's kind of where I landed and got me to not only explore that, but then also write a book of my own in that space.
Awesome. Yeah, and this, as we spoke earlier, is one of my favorite conversations or topics, because the crossroads for me between psychology and technology is a beautiful one. When you can understand, as best as you can, the mind of your donor or your volunteer or your funder, you're able to build, in this case, technology, or in my case, I should say, technology that then will, the reason why certain websites work better than others is because they understand the psychology of the people visiting it. You take it to a higher level, it's not just technology, it's the whole overall approach to how they do things, which is awesome. So yeah, let's jump into this as I start salivating here. But before we do that, maybe you could tell me just more about your book, and then what you kind of do, the work you kind of do today to bring us up to speed, up to date.
Yeah, you bet. So speaking of technology, while I was at one of the nonprofits that I was working at just a few years ago, I built a technology platform in generative AI, which I then was lucky enough to sell to a company called iWave, which is now rebranded as Kindsight. So the AI that's part of Kindsight is based upon some of the technology that I built. And so I now work for Kindsight. And as part of that journey, I wanted to not only encapsulate the learning that I had as a frontline fundraiser, but more importantly, wanted to put together a resource for nonprofits, whether they be fundraisers or board members or executive leaders, around what the science and the data suggests around neuroscience and behavioral science that applies to the day-to-day work, the technology work that you mentioned, all of that in one easy to access resource. And that's the book Neurogiving, which comes out December 9th of 2026 or 2025, sorry. And that book is really essentially a lit review. It's 220 source citations from peer-reviewed studies inside of the charitable giving space, but also outside of the space. So think Dan Ariely from Duke and Amos Tversky and Danny Kahneman, like those types of things all coming together into one place that kind of says, what does it look like to understand the mind of the donor and the science of their decision making, and then how do we implement that, not as a Jedi mind trick type of hack, but to align the work that we do, whether it's in a written appeal, on a website, in a conversation, to make the decision of the donor align with what they already want to do.
Awesome. So I'm looking forward to that book, and we'll make sure to, of course, put links on it, or the ability to, the preview, so forth, in the show notes. But the idea here then is psychology. I mean, it's neuroscience, it's psychology, it's understanding how we as humans think. I mean, that's obviously the foundation of where things are and where we get to where we want to be. I'm curious to know, what have you discovered in terms of, what are those basic, are there basic principles? Not are there, but what are the basic principles that we as nonprofits can lean into and understand and need to understand to be able to build anything properly, whether it's technology or a strategy or a plan? What are the key elements of either neuroscience or behaviorism or psychology as they play into the minds of nonprofits?
So I think it's the core. I wouldn't have written the book if it wasn't kind of what I would say the Rosetta Stone of the work that we're doing. What I mean by that is the psychological elements of donor decision-making are really the engine of everything that comes into play, whether it's the overarching strategy down to the very minute tactical details of the work that we're doing. And that could not be more true than it is today in a world where attention is incredibly fragmented. Every one of our donors is impacted by 1,000 notifications a day on their phones, on their devices. There's so much information on social media and emails and whatnot. It's very hard to get salience and to be able to capture attention. So we have often thought about the ability to kind of play into emotions, which is a psychological component. And we've often talked about data-driven decision-making. But when we tap into the identity of the donor and go deeper into the psychology of how particularly generous decision-making is done, that's really the steering wheel of all of the work that each one of the nonprofits listening is able to not necessarily create a 180. What I talk about at the beginning of the book is that everybody has had a conversation with someone who's not generous, and they know that you can't convince someone who is never going to make any sort of gift whatsoever can't convince them to make a gift in the first place. That's just not going to happen. And if they don't care about your mission at all, you're not going to convince them to make a gift. I'll joke that if you have someone who loves meat and loves eating bacon, trying to convince them to be a vegan is a very long path. It's not impossible, but it's a very long path. So trying to convince someone who is not generous to make their first gift is a very long path. Now, it turns out that the science actually indicates that pre-linguistic babies have evidence of generosity and empathy and altruism. So most people are born generous, and then stuff gets in the way, and that makes them, comes to pass where they're less likely to be generous for various reasons. But if we identify those people who are generous and are generous towards our cause, then it's about eliminating the friction to them being their best selves, them living out their identity in the way that they most want to engage in the work that they want to do. So when a single story of a person who could be helped captures that attention and sparks that indwelt generosity of the person, people they give more, and that allows us to align with how their brain actually works, as opposed to working against it or making it harder for them to do what they do. And a very simple example that I give people all the time is when someone lands on your website, on the donation page in particular, the thing that we have to remember is that they have a credit card in hand. They're holding a card ready to make a gift. So the thing that we want to do is allow them to enter that information or transact that gift really as quickly and as easily as possible. We don't want to interfere with what they want to do. So that's kind of the simplest sort of, I guess, aha moment, is that in that moment, the donor's deepest desire is to give you money. So get out of their way.
Yeah, that's a huge part. I've seen so many donation pages and forms that are so long, asking for information that's not pertinent to the moment, so they can do follow-up marketing or segmentation or contacting at
Exactly.
phone numbers and this alternative phone numbers. And like, I agree. And I'm not saying Amazon is the North Star here, but like it's usually very easy to do it in Amazon, even if you're a first-time purchaser, you don't have credit card saved on file. They've figured out at least a certain recipe to say, all right, we're now on the donate page or the checkout page, whatever you want to call it. And you'll notice like there's not much else branding. All the branding, all the headers and footers have been removed to remove any kind of distraction. Right? It's just the form itself. You have to press back. There's like a back button, and that's all you have basically to get out of here. Otherwise, it's forward steps only, and it's just only the information that they need to be able to complete that order. And I don't believe there's anything more. And if there is, there shouldn't be, especially when it comes to donation
That's
pages.
right.
So absolute minimum, making sure that it's as easy as possible, as fewer clicks as possible, as few as page scrolls as possible. If you can get it all into a single page, you'll have a much better conversion rate than if you just put all this extra blockers in the way.
And I think that sometimes we get in our own heads about we only have one chance to get, the t-shirt size and the dog's collar size and the donor's favorite color or whatever it is for this purpose of segmentation later on. And we lose track of the fact that the donor wants to just give you money. So at this stage, do that and then get the t-shirt size later. And what we don't often track with nonprofits, which for-profits do track a lot, particularly in e-commerce, is the abandoned cart or the fact that people don't complete a transaction. And there are some studies out there that indicate that somewhere between 70 and 80% of donation forms are not completed or abandoned. And so we don't even track, we don't even know how many people are landing on the donate page and are not actually completing that work because of any number of things. It could be the form is too long. It could be there are too many required fields. It could be that the doorbell rang and there's an Amazon person that needs a signature. There's any number of reasons why that happened with or without our control, within or without our control. But with whatever we have control over, there's something that we could do. And I don't want to just leave it at friction free, because I know that a lot of people, particularly in your audience, will say, we've heard reduce friction and fine. We'll do our best to do that. I think we actually need to even think about psychologically in the mind of the donor, when we've gotten to a point where it's as frictionless as possible, we've got whether it's one-click donate or we've offered the payment plan, the payment options that are the easiest for folks, and they don't have to go find a credit card. They can pay with different options that are easy for them, that are saved or whatever, Apple Pay, Google Pay, Venmo, blah, 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 whatever that might be. All of those different things that make it super easy, even if they're holding a child in one hand and they're shopping at the time, or they're walking and they, those different circumstances for whatever the donor is doing at the time. We also want to think about what I think her name is Nazreen Shangul talks about. She was doing product at Spotify and Google Chrome and Google Meet. And what she describes it as is the delightful experience. What is the delightful experience for a product user? And for all of our donor-centered language around the best version of our discussions about giving and potentially even our appeal making process, a lot of what we do on the website in the space of the actual donation process is very transactional. It's not very delightful. And there are lots of ways in which we can bring delight to that. And every organization listening is very different, right? But how are we making that a joyful experience, which is what generosity is supposed to be? It's supposed to be enjoyable, but it very much is sanitized. And it does feel like a cart transaction of I purchase something and then I get this automated receipt that nobody pays attention to. It is very kind of, it doesn't stand out. It's not It's not exciting to anyone in any way. And we forget that generosity is not required. It's not something that anyone has to do or even necessarily can be convinced that they need to do. Like maybe someone will say, I need a new iPhone or I need a new pair of shoes, even if they don't really need one. But they certainly don't need to give $10 or $100 to their local food bank. So how do we create experiences that sit in the mind of the donor like, I really want to do that thing. I can't wait to do that thing again. That was a really wonderful experience. And that's what I think honestly, the whole technology experience with nonprofits is truly missing from a UI UX perspective.
One example I can think of in terms of delightful, it's not really for donation pages. It's actually in Salesforce. In Salesforce, when you have what's called a sales opportunity, and you're going through the various stages from draft to negotiation to finalization, contract signing, and then you basically close win it to say you've won the contract.
Yep.
And there is an option that when you get to close win, to shoot that the screen will show confetti.
Yeah.
And you can actually have it randomly. So it's not every single time you close every single opportunity, but it could be on a random basis. But the idea is that it's a very simple way of having a bit of delight in there. Okay, it's a celebration. Like, the confetti goes all across the screen. It's a cause for celebration. Something similar to that, or even before you click on the checkout button, are little ways that you can add to that donation page to make it a little more engaging. To your point, make it a little more fun. Like if you start increasing or changing, for example, the amount you're going to donate, you can have a very visual indicator of the impact that you're having versus, for each of these things. If you donate $5, you're going to save, feed these many people. If you donate $500, you'll save these many people or feed these many people. And just having that kind of way in a playful way, serious but playful in the sense of there's a kind of a reward experience that you are almost incentivized or motivated to get a bigger emotional rush and be more delighted if you pay or donate more. Like that could be very powerful.
Absolutely. And I mean, Asana does that as well. Like when you complete a task, there's confetti or a unicorn that flies across the screen or something like that. There's a reason why product design does these things, because they understand the psychology. They truly understand the psychology of a reward phenomenon. And we don't do that with donors who engage with a donation on our pages or whether it's on our pages or with an offline donation. We've not been creative. We've not been innovative. We've not thought about what that looks like when someone makes a gift. And somebody listening might be like, oh, that's very hokey to have like confetti fly out when the button happens. But there are very serious products out there that do those types of things, not just Salesforce or Asana. And it doesn't have to be confetti. It could be any number of other things. But what is it that you're doing that reaffirms to the donor? Because they're not getting, when you order a pizza from Domino's, immediately when you finalize that transaction, they show you that Sam put your pizza in the oven and that pizza is going to be at your door in 12 to 14 minutes. Like there is a process that reaffirms to you, you made a good decision and your pizza is going to be there. Or like you said on Amazon, you buy the thing, you know that it's going to be there in a day, 2 days, or in 4 hours or whatever it might be. But then as it gets closer, it says your package is 10 stops away and it shows it on a map. Like we're doing all of these things because our brains need updates. Our brains need to know where are we in the process? What's happening? And when we don't get that information, our brains start to ask questions about what does that look like? Now, in the case of a for-profit entity like Amazon or Domino's, they're trying to stave off customer questions and avoid those questions from rising to the level of complaints. In our situation, though, of organizations who don't have an exchange of value, there isn't a thing that's coming to them. What every organization listening needs to understand is as soon as someone clicks that button, the thought that runs through their mind is, did that money actually do something? Did I do the right thing? Or is this money going into a vortex of nothingness? And so it's not only the reward, it's also a reaffirmation that they did something good, that the money's being spent in the way that they intended, that it's actually helping the cause that they cared about, that's reaffirming their identity as generous people. So when we go silent or we give them some generic transactional receipt type of email, we have not reaffirmed any of the psychological need that that person has. And so they keep wondering. And then we're surprised when they don't renew because we have not given them any of the validation that's necessary to engender loyalty. Loyalty has a very clear psychological structure. It is a repeated process of promise and trust. You make a promise and you deliver on that, and that builds trust over and over and over again. And when we don't establish those elements, then there's a gap in the neuroscience of the donor. They're like, I'm not sure if they're going to do what they said they do, so I'm not going to trust them with my resources again. Or I'm going to entrust another organization to see what they do. And I mean, in this case, it's just playing whack-a-mole with a bunch of organizations that are doing the exact same thing. And, lather, rinse, repeat to a certain extent. So I know, that's a bit of a diatribe on the larger problems in our industry. But my point is that it all comes back to the fact that organizations in general are not spending enough time thinking about these core psychological principles that impact every part of the experience of our donors, of our stake, and this is true of stakeholders across the board. It could be volunteers, it could be anybody that interacts with your organization, but certainly of donors in particular.
Hey, Alex here. I want to take a brief moment and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode so far, please consider sharing it with someone who would also benefit from its insights. It's these kinds of referrals that really help the show grow. You can also show your support by making a small donation. I don't do corporate sponsorships or product placements, so I rely on your support to keep the show going. You can visit my website, agentsofnonprofit.com, and click Support Us in the top menu. Thank you kindly. When I was getting my certification in user experience, I was reading this article by Nielsen Norman Group, NNG, and they wrote this back in 94. It's still applicable today because it's based on human psychology. And it's called the 10 Usability Heuristics for User Interface Design. And the idea is that these are general principles, very easy to understand, and you can now put the link in the description. But the first one is mentioned is visibility of system status. And what that basically means is when you interact with something, you want to make sure that what you've done had an effect, right? If you push a button in an elevator, you're expecting that light to light up to confirm that, yeah, I recognize and acknowledge your choice. It's the same thing you mentioned when you make a donation. I not only, of course, do you get a confirmation page and all that kind of stuff and the receipt and whatnot, but to take it one step further is, okay, now here's how we're using your money. The status, the system status in this case doesn't change. It doesn't end when you've made the donation, right? It keeps on going based on the fact of, hey, now that this money's put in this account or it's over here, now it's being sent to this family. All that kind of feedback is very rewarding. And you're right, it will bring back, it creates that rewarding desire in people, and again, wanting to do that again. In addition to that, what I would say is modern games these days, video games, mobile games, are really gamified, and they're really they've been changed over the last few years to do microtransactions, and they have a tremendous success rate. Whether you agree with the principles or not, and most of the time I would say personally I don't agree with it, there's a lot of lottery reward type systems in there. But the point of it is that it works. It works because they took the time to understand what is the psychology of people and how do we get them to make these microtransactions so that our small little mobile app, even though it sucks, it might make a lot of money and more than it probably should, given what it's actually giving. But the idea is that they're applying these principles, knowing how we work as humans in their favor. And I would say, again, not to the best altruistic goals. It's that there are elements of that you as a nonprofit can take and use it for positive goals and saying, okay, because we like rewards before we like delightment, before we like risk adverse, and there's different ways that we can structure either our technology or our strategy to leverage those things to gain things in our favor to make sure that we actually have a larger impact. So just two concepts here. I want to make sure people were, if they don't know where to start, and of course your book too, but the idea is that these are three ways to start figuring out how do we understand what is the psychology of people, and then how do we start leveraging them into the real world or into our world.
Yeah, precisely. And I mean, just a note on gamification, because gamification can go, like, there's parts of that we absolutely should consider. And like all things, it's about staying somewhere in the middle, right? Like if we don't use any sort of gamification elements or rewarding elements, we fail to align ourselves with donor psychology. But if we go too far, that will create other problems. And that's the issue with any sort of psychological principle. And I know that some people will look at true video games and say, well, we don't want to do that. And I understand that. But there are lessons that should and can be learned from the video games that all of your audience members, all of you listening, have on your phones today. And the fact that you open them up on a regular basis tells us something about your psychology. It should tell you something about your psychology, that you open it up on a regular basis and you probably do make these micro transactions that Alex just mentioned. Like there's something maybe that's free, that it's called the foot in the door concept. That's one of the heuristics. And by giving you a little bit of something for free, you're more likely to buy something small in order to continue using the product or the game or whatever, to buy something as part of that. So they don't slam you with buy $100 or buy $1,000. They'll give you something a little bit for free. I play this little silly game, this Star Wars game once in a while, and they'll give you this thing for free, and then they'll ask you to pay $1.99, right? Like, and I admit fully that every once in a while I'll pay $1.99 to get the thing to move the players further, faster, or whatever. And it's that same psychology. What do I want to accomplish, and how will this get the reward that I seek? Which is stupid. I fully admit that it's stupid. But think about all of the other types of applications that you open on a regular basis, and what is that telling you about your psychology, whether it's Instagram or LinkedIn or whatever it is that's drawing you in, and the things that you pay for on a monthly basis or a regular basis. What's the psychology at play there that's driving that kind of behavior? A lot of it is around ease. The example that I give in the keynote about this book and generosity quite a bit is that we are so averse to cognitive friction as a society that we want to have so much ease in our daily life that we often have either a standard coffee order, or we do not want to stand in line and speak to a barista to make that coffee order. We have such an aversion to cognitive friction around those two simple things that we have proactively put billions of dollars into the hands of Starbucks via their application, their mobile application, making Starbucks one of the largest functional banks in the country. It is not actually a bank because it is not regulated as a bank, but they are holding deposits larger than most banks in the country, solely because of a psychological principle of friction aversion. We just don't want to talk to a barista. We just don't want to deal with having to make a choice in the line, in the order, whatever. So we will put $30, $50, whatever, into the hands of Starbucks proactively, sometimes on auto reload, and they will hold this without giving us any interest, without any sort of financial regulation. They will hold this on their balance sheet, and we will use that to buy coffee so that we don't have friction. So if you don't believe that these psychological principles are true, all you have to do is look at that Starbucks app and know that every single one of your donors in some way is impacted by something like this. And it is ubiquitous and it is significant.
And there's like 15 different ways I can take that. Yeah. So I'm gonna start spitting these out. Maybe go a little shorter form because we're gonna run out of time really fast if we spend too much time on each of these things. But the first thing I wanted to mention was you talking about there's thresholds, a little too much or too little in terms of the gamification of things. And the analogy I would come up with is contrast. When you're building a website, for example, if there's too little contrast, if it's all just shades of white and shades of beige or whatever, your eye isn't really attracted to anything. There's just your eye gets kind of bored. And if there's too much contrast, if the colors are like, blue and red and yellow, like it's just and strong colors, your eye gets very agitated, your brain gets very agitated. So it's somewhere in the middle that is usually the sweet spot. And it's like almost anything in life, right? The extreme of anything is probably not a good idea, and the minimal of anything is probably not very good. So you're always aiming for that middle part, and that makes sense. So applying the gamification principles to that effect, in that way, is a great way to start. The second thing.
That's precisely right. And I mean, Alex, you are the UI UX expert. I'm not like a website designer by any means, but from a contrast perspective, what I would say is there's reasons why, for example, a lot of people will recommend that the donate button is a different color on the top right of the website. And that, there's good psychological reasons why that's true. It's not just because of some, generic reason. It's that contrast effect. Contrast effect is a heuristic. And what colors you choose and how you do that is up to a user experience person, like yourself, that knows exactly what colors and why and all of those types of things. That's well above my pay grade. But at a core level, our eyes are attracted to that contrast. And when they see that donate button in a contrasting color, and it's up and to the right for most cultures, then they see that and they're like, oh, my eye is drawn to it. I should click on that button. And same thing with like above the fold, a human image with an eye, with eyes that are directed to a particular thing. Those psychological principles are all proven through numbers of studies that tell us this is what drives human behavior. It's what indicates how people direct their focus. And we have heat maps that tell us this. All these types of things around whether it's it's very much true about website design. It's very much true around like print media and whatnot. And advertising companies, you mentioned that study from like 1990, that like these principles have not changed. It's that for a lot of organizations, they have not necessarily they've not paid attention to it, or they've not accessed this stuff because they've focused on, to a certain extent, rightly so, their mission, but not necessarily aligned with the work that's been done outside of the sector that it certainly impacts the work that they're doing now that they're using websites and using, all of these types of things that are essential to actually doing the work of the day.
So as part of my training again for UX, you learn what's called the pre-attentive perception of visual traits. And that's a lot of words to say. Basically, our eyes, the way that they've evolved, is to recognize differences, because differences could be a threat, right? If everything is uniform, we think everything is fine. But if there's one thing that's different than the others, we perceive that as a potential threat. But that could be, of course, just a different length, a different color, a 3D depth cue. It could be orientation, size, like density, and contrast is one of them. So the whole idea of having that, what they call call to action button, which is a different color and very radically different, is to get its attention because we're leveraging these pre-attentive perceptions of visual traits.
Yep.
So that's like the lowest level of almost psychology that we can get to. Okay, that was only point number one, though. Again, point number two, shopping. So when you're shopping for something, this is something I also realized is the once you've opened your wallet once, you're much more likely to open up a second time shortly thereafter. And I'm guilty of this myself. Like I have the Amazon Prime Day, at least in Canada, it was last week, and I had a whole bunch of things in my wish list, right? And I bought one thing, and then all of a sudden I almost couldn't help myself from buying virtually everything on that list.
Yep.
And they say that even in physical retail stores, if the staff should be always trained that if a person comes in with shopping bags, they're much more likely to buy again than if someone comes in with no shopping bags. They've already opened their wallet once. Now is the time. So that also could be used in different ways, right? You could have a donation page where you'd make the first donation, that completes, and then you could ask for, additional donations for other causes or other types of things. even if it's a fraction of the cost, especially if it's a fraction of the cost of what you donated, right? If I've donated $100 and say, hey, for an extra $5, you can also have this impact. That's just one way of leveraging our kindness and reciprocity rule and willingness to donate once we've donated once.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. Again, we can talk about the, we're kind of going speed style here. And Starbucks, yeah, I heard that multiple times now that Starbucks is more of a bank than an actual coffee place. That's a funny way of perceiving it, but it is legitimately true.
Yeah. And I mean, most people don't think about it, especially around the psychological reasons why that's true. But it's interesting you bring that up around, sort of the additive effect. I was actually talking to a nonprofit yesterday. They do work in a country in Africa. It doesn't matter which one right now, but they have essentially like a child sponsorship model, and they have not been able to get donors off the child sponsorship model for a long time. And what I said was, because the donors have been on this child sponsorship model, $35 a month for 7 years or something like that, what I said was, you have donors who have a vested interest in the child right away. When they come into the organization, they are inclined to support the child. One of the best things that you can do is now say, because you are supporting the child, here are all the things that the child depends on in order for them to thrive. There's a school, there's a water well, there's all of this other infrastructure. Would you essentially add on to your gift to engage with all of this other work? You care so much and blah, blah, blah. And then you can do that at the time of the transaction. You can do that 3 months later, whatever it might be. And my point was, for organizations that do that kind of work, or it doesn't really matter, you have someone who's already generous. They bought into this part of the cause. They're more likely to have a vested interest in the other surrounding pieces. But particularly for that cause, you do want them to have an affinity towards the other unrestricted parts of the work that's being done. And so for folks that are listening that have kind of a tie towards restricted funding, think about how this psychology can play into that, whether it's that foot in the door heuristic or another part of the psychology, to say, what are ways in which, because they have already created that investment opening, you can also identify ways in which they can invest in other ways, as long as you continue to build that trust, as long as you've developed that engagement with them. Now, coming out of nowhere is not going to serve you well, but if you do the work correctly, then they're more likely to reciprocate.
Let's talk about attention span, because you mentioned that earlier on. And of course, everybody's on mobile these days. I'm curious to know, what considerations should nonprofits have in order to be able to capture as much attention as possible, knowing that it's fractured and limited and fleeting?
Yeah. So, I mean, that is the reality. And no matter what your feelings are about the attention economy, we do live in an attention economy where that is the currency. And what I want to remind people of, some people say we have an attention span less than a goldfish, and I don't know why we're insulting goldfish so much. But the piece that I would remind everyone of is that as we're recording this, it's the middle of October, and in November, Stranger Things will come out. The last season of Stranger Things will come out. And if you are a Stranger Things fan, you will sit and you will binge watch Stranger Things when it comes out. And that will hold your attention. I think today, actually, the new season of The Diplomat will come out, and I will watch as many episodes of The Diplomat as I possibly can. I really enjoy the show. So we can have and hold attention for the things that matter. But when somebody does not have the attachment, the attention plus emotion plus action plus memory, when those things are not all connected to one another, then attention is very fleeting. And so we tend to believe that volume is the way to get attention. And I don't mean just loudness, just more content, more things. And I spend a lot of time in artificial intelligence talking to people about AI and AI uses, and people tend to believe that if we create more content, then that will gain more attention. But the reality is that we need to be focused on better, more relevant, more identity-aligned content, so that people will see that and and if they do see it, that they see themselves in that content, because if they're attached to it, then they will spend more time engaging with that content. So the thing to remember is that, like on social media, you have milliseconds to be able to grab attention. On a website, people are not reading every word. They're not reading sentences. They're skimming. They're not parsing all of the information that you're putting. And there are very clear studies that indicate this. So and on print mail or in print material, they're also not reading every single word. So people get really hung up about very specific details. And I'm not saying you should throw out grammar or you should not proofread things. That's not my point. But what I am saying is that we do need to understand that large, dense copy, lots of explanation, the avoidance of white space, the avoidance of images, like all of these things cause a problem for our audience. They're not able to process information as quickly and as easily. We need to make things very simple for folks in order for them. This is not dumbing it down. This is aligning with how our brains work in the era that we're in. And that's just the reality, because we don't have the time to be able to provide a full treatise on what we're doing. So it is a lot of the time, it's our inclination to try to explain everything that we're doing. And we need to hold back that inclination and to say, what's honestly the one line why? The one line why, the single sentence why of what we're doing that can grab the attention and hold the attention. It's not just grabbing it. We also need to hold that attention long enough that they'll be engaged in whatever we're asking them to do. In some cases, it might be to make a donation or to learn more or to volunteer, whatever it might be. We don't want them to just stop and view our content on social media or to read the website landing page. We want them to do something as a result of that. So we need to grab and hold that attention to a point where they're going to do something and then actually remember. I make a big point in my talks, in my book and whatnot, that it really is about intentional memory formation, because if they don't remember that they gave or why they gave, then it doesn't really matter because we won't retain them anyway.
Another principle in UX is something called cognitive load.
Yeah.
And the idea is that we have a certain amount of working memory at any given time. And if we start to overload that, then people get confused, frustrated, aggravated, and they will just push it away. So you don't want to load up their cognitive abilities too far by having too much text or too many images or videos or advertisements, because each one of these things wears a person down, because they have to at some point, at some level, absorb it and understand it, right? Or ignore it if they can, if it's an advertisement, for example.
Giving options. Like a lot of times we provide too many giving options to folks.
Yep. I mean, the idea is that don't overwhelm your users. Get what you need, keep it simple, have enough contrast that doesn't get them bored, but just don't overwhelm them, because that would be one way for sure of reducing their attention, because they'll be overwhelming them. So that's one thing I want to mention. What about mobile stuff? Because mobile, a lot of people these days, I think you mentioned, GPay and Apple Pay, stuff like that, in terms of facilitating certain payments that are more accessible when you're on the mobile phone. Like, are there any other considerations? Obviously, real estate, you can't have
That's right.
too much. Like websites, if they're overly complicated, it's harder to show on a mobile phone, even in today's technology. So any other considerations that you would recommend for people who are building websites and making sure that, probably, I would gather now, I can't have any numbers off the top of my head, but I imagine more than 50% of users going to donation pages are probably on their phones, as opposed to, maybe I'm wrong, but it's a high number. It's a really high number. Let's just call it that way. So
yeah,
given that, the adoption of the mobile phone in terms of going to pages, what, besides offering simple donation options, like, to me, I'm thinking, autocomplete addresses, not too many clicks, because you're obviously not poking on your screen. Any other considerations, not just for donation pages, but any other page within a nonprofit's organization, to consider, like, hey, because you guys are your donors or your visitors are coming by mobile, then you should consider this and avoid that kind of thing.
Absolutely. So I think the 50% number might be low actually, but for some organizations, and so if you are not tracking that information, I would suggest that that's the first place to start checking whether your emails are being opened on a mobile device and whether the people visiting your website are visiting from a mobile device, and then making sure that your website content is optimized for a mobile device, because I do think the number is very, very high for most folks. And then certainly making sure that your giving forms are optimized for a mobile device, because if someone's, like I said, standing in line with a kid in one arm at a checkout counter and they're trying to make a gift while they're doing that and they can't do it, well, you've lost the opportunity to make that gift, for that gift to happen. Anything that you can do around like one-click payment options is going to be very helpful, and making that value proposition very clear using simple language. And the other thing that we hadn't talked about, whether it's on a desktop or regular website, and certainly on a website, a mobile website, is that load times really, really make a difference. So images that are optimized and mobile speed is very important. If a website takes too long to load, nobody's going to wait for that. And I don't know that a lot of organizations pay attention to those times, but I know that I get frustrated when a website doesn't load, and I will just abandon that search. So, or that website. So it's really important that you invest in that technology to make sure that your website's going to load quickly, that it's mobile optimized, and that the technology enables the gift to occur quickly and easily for your donors. And then obviously all throughout that process, so the gift can be transacted, the stewardship can happen as well in a way that is optimized for mobile as well. That, I think that's really just the starting point. There's way more things that can be done that we talked about at the beginning around like a rewarding, delightful experience. But that's where I would start for anyone who's just beginning this journey. There's some evidence in the book around like haptic feedback and how that actually is in and of itself a rewarding element, and how donors that grew up in a digital first environment are engaging with mobile in a very different way than those of, for example, my generation that did not grow up with that, and how their communication styles are different, and how that may be a different way of approaching donors that may be a focus for some organizations based upon what they do. And so it will depend on your specific organization and who your donors are and how you engage with them. But I would say certainly understanding your donors and their engagement with mobile technology is certainly the way to start that discussion.
In terms of AI, because we haven't mentioned that one yet, how do you say AI influencing donor psychology and digital fundraising?
So I think there's pluses and minuses to this, and obviously I am having built and sold an AI company. I'm a fan of some aspects of AI. I do think it will enable some pieces of the technology to accelerate faster, right? So for example, being able to do search engine optimization using AI is great because that's an onerous task. And being able to do, I just did a workshop, I mentioned to you before we got started, I did a workshop here at Charitable Gift Planners, and you can use the agent tool on ChatGPT to secret shop your website and identify friction on your website, which is super helpful in a way that we've never been able to do before. That's really fun. That's really a useful option. I do think also AI could be used in a way that's problematic, right? Where it could be used to create more content that does not help your cause, or it can be used to create personalization that is not helpful. And so there's all kinds of ways that AI could go awry if it was not used in the right way. But I like to believe that organizations will use AI to enhance the donor experience and to allow fundraisers to do the relationship work, that it will optimize and remove the friction so that fundraisers can build the relationship and engage in the trust building activities human to human and allow the kind of back end work to function seamlessly in the background.
Love it. As we're winding down and leaning into the superhero theme of the show, I was curious to know if you had a superpower or a magic wand to be able to change something in this space, what would it be?
So I think everyone's trying to figure out how to scale generosity, how to, whether it's get more people to donate or get people to donate more or whatnot. If I had a superpower, it would be to have people see the opportunity to design everything, to be intentional about everything, from their subject lines to their stewardship, to their conversations, to their websites, to their mobile experience, to everything around how the brain notices, how it feels, how it decides, how it remembers. Because when we are intentional about those pieces and about all of those pieces, I mean, this is life work for me, but I think when it becomes life work for everyone in those organizations and they're invested in that intentionality, it truly does allow scalability insofar as we are responsive to what donors truly want and what they want to see for themselves. And whether that means more donations or bigger donations or whatnot is really a function of what donors will ultimately do with their generosity. But it allows us to get out of the way of donors being their best selves and what their generosity could be. But I think we stop working harder to get them to do what they don't necessarily want to do, and allows us to free up our energy to do our best work, which is what we're best designed to do.
I was biting my tongue through this entire conversation just to be able to make sure we keep it within the allotted time. We could have gone on for a lot longer. Cherian, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. I was hoping that if you could share ways that people can get in touch with you in case they have follow-up questions.
I'm happy to take follow-up questions or engage with anybody. My website is cheriankoshy.com. I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram, and there's some YouTube videos and whatnot, all the same name. And the book is available through the website. And also there's some pre-order bonuses at neurogivingbook.com as well.
We'll be sure to, of course, have all those in the show notes. Cherian, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you so much for doing what you do. And I hope the book is a smashing success.
Thanks so much, Alex. Appreciate you.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.